sessions together. Today, we are reading The Altar of God, section 2.3. And this is a concept that can seem mystical to some, can seem abstract. You probably will have many questions along the way if you haven't already read this material. Hopefully by the end, it will be much more clearer than it is by the beginning. I wanted to step back before we begin reading 2.3 and ask David to read a few lines from section 2.2.
The atonement as defense. The atonement is a total commitment. You may still think this is associated with loss, a mistake all the separated sons of God make in one way or another. It is hard to believe a defense that cannot attack is the best defense. This is
David, you froze.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to see who, all right, there, I think you're back, David. Oh, you're unmuted though.
Was I muted that whole time?
No, why don't you begin with it's hard to believe?
It is hard to believe a defense that cannot attack is the best defense. This is what is meant by the meek shall inherit the earth. They will literally take it over because of their strength.
Mm-hmm. So our intention isn't really to go back and review all these materials in any kind of detail. The atonement is a total commitment. I had to ask myself, what am I really totally committed to? I mean, I have commitments, but are they total commitments? The atonement is a total commitment. And as we read about its relationship to the altar of God, I think you'll begin to realize the value and importance atonement has in that larger framework. So then, Susie?
Can I just ask you a question, Jonathan,
Yeah.
or comment or ask a question? I mean, I feel like the whole course is a total commitment because it talks about how there's no middle ground anywhere. What's true is true, what's false is false, only love is real. The whole course is a total commitment. Would you agree with that or say that that's true?
Well,
I mean, I know in the introduction it says only the time we take is voluntary.
Right.
So I understand that. But if we are doing the course,
yeah,
or
I think,
would you say that what is true and what's false is false?
Certainly. I think if you use the workbook lessons, Susie, as a framework, you'll notice it's very gentle at the beginning. Do the best you can, just a few minutes a day. Doesn't start out as a total commitment, starts out very gentle and certainly escalates pretty quickly and ends on the level of a total commitment. So I would call it an evolutionary process of making progress from not committed to totally committed.
Got it. Great distinction.
And so the door is open to those who are not totally committed. Matter of fact, we kind of expect when you begin, you just try asking yourself, what's this all about? What am I doing here? What's the meaning of all this? But over time, those who remain and stay are naturally, the mind gravitates towards being fully committed.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, let's do paragraph 1.
The atonement can only be accepted within you by releasing the inner light. Since the separation, defenses have been used almost entirely to defend against the atonement and thus maintain the separation. This is generally seen as a need to protect the body. The many body fantasies in which minds engage arise from the distorted belief that the body can be used as a means for attaining atonement. Perceiving the body as a temple is only the first step in correcting this distortion, because it alters only part of it. It does recognize that atonement in physical terms is impossible. The next step, however, is to realize that a temple is not a structure at all. Its true holiness lies at the inner altar around which the structure is built. The emphasis on beautiful structures is a sign of the fear of atonement and an unwillingness to reach the altar itself. The real beauty of the temple cannot be seen with the physical eye. Spiritual sight, on the other hand, cannot see the structure at all because it is perfect vision. It can, however, see the altar with perfect clarity.
Mhm. So this starts out on a note of a distortion of confusion where the separation and defenses are used against the atonement to keep it at a distance. This would be the confused state of mind. And then that gets projected onto the body, and the defenses then wind up being centered upon keeping the body safe, protecting the body from the harm in the world. And that becomes a prevailing view of our world, of the confused world. So we call this a distorted belief, and we need to understand how to correct these things, which we'll walk through in a minute. But Kathy, you had your hand up.
In the first sentence where it says the atonement can only be accepted by releasing the inner light, are we talking about extending love there to our brother, or is it something else?
Those words are extending love, love and light to our brother, because they're the same thing. But Kathy, there's a number of references in the course about spiritual light, spiritual luminosity, the great rays, the inner light, that, and this is not physical light. So there's something there which is not elaborated on in detail, but is pointed to the inner light within you. You are the light of the world, that light. So yes, and that naturally expresses itself in forms of love to others. So we are talking about the same thing, but the terms may be used slightly differently. So we have this confusion using defenses to keep the atonement away. This creates a distorted view of everything. And then defenses get projected on protecting the body. So out of that confusion, A Course in Miracles wants to correct these errors. So where do we begin? The first step in correcting this distortion has to do with the way we perceive the body. And it's only part of the correction. It's not the complete answer. So it by recognizing that where distorted belief. Okay. So the belief that the body can be used for attaining union, for attaining oneness, for attaining atonement. We're going to recognize that as an error. Oneness and union and wholeness and holiness cannot be attained by the body. Next, perceiving the body as a temple is a step in the direction of correcting these distortions, because we no longer are looking outside ourselves for something out there that will bring us into oneness with creation, with all things. We realize it's within. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not complete. It's only the first step to turn within. There's more, because we have to recognize that atonement in physical terms is impossible. We can't, it's not the body itself that is going to achieve union. The next step is to realize that the idea of a temple that houses something holy within it is really a physical metaphor for a spiritual reality, because the temple is not a structure at all. We're using a metaphor when we say temple. We're not talking about a real structure. We're talking about something that exists on the spiritual plane, where the true holiness lies, at the altar, the inner altar around which the structure is built, around which the temple is built. So what we're trying to do is move past orthodox views that center upon the body as the mechanisms for attaining union, and move into the inner plane, where we recognize there's some kind of holiness within us, and we'll use the term the inner altar to refer to the very center of all that. That's where we're getting to. Everything else is just a story to get us to the recognition of this inner altar where holiness is found. And and how are you ever going to recognize the inner altar? You can only do it with spiritual sight. You cannot do it with intellect. You certainly cannot do it with your physical eyes, nor can you do it with your mind, reason and logic your way into it. It's a spiritual sight. And so, Kathy, this comes back to the light within you. It's a spiritual illumination within you. You see it on the spiritual plane, and it is tied to what we are going to call perfect vision, perfect spiritual vision. So within you is not that this spiritual inner holiness has a type of perfection to it already inherently, and that vision can see the altar with perfect clarity. So bottom line, what we're talking about can only be seen with a spiritual vision. No matter how many intellectual episodes you attempt to apply to it, it's not seen through the intellect. It's seen through spirit. Kathy?
So it's like workbook lesson 42 today, right? We're praying for vision. We're acknowledging.
God is my strength. Vision is his gift.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Where is the source come from for vision? God. It's a gift from God called spiritual vision that allows us to see a holy light within with perfect clarity. And we're going to refer to the center of all that as our inner altar. Okay, more to come, but we've established now of what it's not. It's not physical, it's not intellectual, it is within you, it is perfect. It can only be seen and appreciated with spiritual sight. And it is amazing, Kathy, God is my strength, vision is his gift, is the lesson for workbook lesson. Today's the 42nd day of the year, it's lesson 42. It is amazing that how these things link up. Let's go on.
For perfect effectiveness, the atonement belongs at the center of the inner altar, where it undoes the separation and restores the wholeness of the mind. Before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear because fear did not exist. Both the separation and the fear are miscreations that must be undone for the restoration of the temple and for the opening of the altar to receive the atonement. This heals the separation by placing within you the one effective defense against all separation thoughts and making you perfectly invulnerable.
Okay, so now we're going to tie the atonement and the altar together. So for perfect effectiveness, that's not to say people will not try to use the atonement in some other application, but to be perfectly effective, it's very clear. Where does the atonement belong? At the inner altar. It's a gift. The atonement is a gift that you receive and give back at the inner altar. The atonement does not come from you, but you receive it from God. Sorry, I'm moving screens around here. But you receive it from God, and then by accepting it, it becomes yours and you give it back at the inner altar. Why is this relevant? Because the idea of being separate from God, separate from creation, of you being an independent ego with your own agenda, causes fear to enter the mind. And these are misuses of the power that was given your mind. These are miscreations. And before we can get back to where we are perfectly effective with our gift at the altar, we've got to clear out this misuse of the mind, the fears and the sense of vulnerabilities and separation. Then we can restore the temple to its original purpose, and the altar will open to receive your gift. This heals the separation. By the way, David, this came up in our discussion. The one effect, it actually doesn't say it here, it says somewhere else. I was going to say it says somewhere else, the one worthy gift that you can bring to the altar is your gift of atonement. It's the thing of great worth that we can bring to the altar. So we're talking about an experience that you can have had in a spiritual plane experience without regard to the physical world or even your intellectual understanding. It's an experience, and many have had this. But to do so, we've got to clear the path, which is to undo the fear and sense of separation and vulnerability, because they will cover over our understanding and awareness of the altar and interfere with it. interfere with our experience. Susie?
So this, this line, both the separation and the fear are miscreations that must be undone. God, I remember when I started, I had so much fear and so much separation. And I just want to say that, like, that's what the first 50 lessons, are, to have done them over and over and over again. I know now that fear is the stranger here, right? I know that when I am in fear, I am listening to my ego, and something old and familiar is creeping up. And I know now that is not real. And it's amazing to read this again, and understand that it really is possible. And if anybody would have told me this years ago, I wouldn't have believed it, that I could really understand my fear and not listen to it. And it really is an experience, because for years before that, I'll just end with, I thought I could talk my way, fix my broken mind with my broken mind. And I know that only the Holy Spirit has been able to help me, and the lessons are just amazing. So it's just great to be reading this again, John.
Mhm. It is indeed. By the way, I'm sure to be emphasized elsewhere, in a dictionary, there are definitions for atonement, and some of the definitions fall out of use. They become archaic, the way it was used in the past. The archaic definition of atone is to undo. The atonement is the undoing of fear and separation. It says it right here, both the separation and the fear are miscreations that must be undone for the restoration of the temple and for the altar to be open to receive the atonement. So think of this perhaps as a journey that involves, first of all, getting to this inner plane experience, and then any remaining fears and separation are relinquished, would be the word that they use frequently in the Course, relinquished, so that we have the altar becomes pristine to us, because there'll be no more darkness and fears in our own mind. Our spiritual insight will clarify, and we'll see the altar for what it truly is, as pristine and holy. Okay, go on.
The acceptance of the atonement by everyone is only a matter of time. This may appear to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the final decision, but this is not so. You can temporize, and you are capable of enormous procrastination, but you cannot depart entirely from your Creator, who sets the limits on your ability to miscreate. An imprisoned will engenders a situation which, in the extreme, becomes altogether intolerable. Tolerance for pain may be high, but it is not without limit. Eventually, everyone begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. As this recognition becomes more firmly established, it becomes a turning point. This ultimately reawakens spiritual vision, simultaneously weakening the investment in physical sight. The alternating investment in the two levels of perception is usually experienced as conflict, which can become very acute, but the outcome is as certain as God.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to assume everybody here knows what this is talking about because you've experienced it yourself. You've know what it means to be capable of enormous procrastination, and you know what fear and separation feels like. You've experienced that. The term that I want to bring to your attention is someone who's in fear and separation, guilt and judgment. Their will is imprisoned. This is a concept that you won't find frequently in other philosophic or spiritual literature. Your will becomes imprisoned by your own beliefs about your own errors in believing about what you are, about what life is all about, what your belief in making illusions true. It chains your will and limits you. So when we talk about being released and becoming free, we talk about freeing your will to return to its original purpose. But this is not the starting point. Imprisoned will is the separate, fearful state. So think about the implications here. This says anyone who's entrenched in separation and fear does not have free will, or is not allowing free will to be expressed, because of the thought system they're using is like an ancient prison that binds their mind. So eventually, this becomes altogether intolerable. And eventually, everyone begins to recognize there must be a better way. And that's why everyone eventually comes to the acceptance of the atonement. That's not to say they do it in one lifetime here on earth. But it does say that eventually people yield on their commitment to remaining in prison and start looking for an alternative. And when they do that, they change direction. They've decided, I've gone to find a way out, and as a result of that change in direction, it reawakens their spiritual vision ultimately. But that doesn't mean they're immediately become awakened. What they do is they go through a period where they are still investing in the old thought system, as well as attempting to invest in clarity and freedom. So this is referred to as an alternating investment in the two levels of perception. You don't want to do this because it will tear you apart. It's usually experienced as inner conflict, and that inner conflict can become very acute. It's like entertaining your holy self and your ego self and investing in both of them at the same time. It will tear you apart. But the outcome, we know the ego is only a temporary state of confusion. The outcome is certain. So it is necessary to move through this in-between stage of investing in both self-concepts. Noelle, you had your hand up.
Yes. So can we say that the better way could be a rededication of the mind to spirit, exchange of mind?
For
yeah.
sure. It doesn't usually start out with a dedication, because we're talking about someone that's been imprisoned in fear and guilt for a long time. They're just looking to have the pain stop. So it starts out, just like we said in the workbook, a very gradual, gentle process of saying, well, must be another way of looking at things. The end state that we're looking for, Noel, you're right, would be dedication, devotion. But we don't demand that of people at the beginning. We allow them to move through the stages, but as we know, you don't want to linger a long time in these in-between stages because it introduces conflict between that part of yourself that's emerging back to memory and your old self that wants to remain in control of your identity. So we want to, so for this reason, yes, move through miracles without delay. Kathy?
I think this, for me, is the beginning of the invisible step, where if we believe in the inner altar of God and we believe in this atonement principle, this invisible step, we take that step and we stop judging and we forgive and do all the things the Course says, that this is guaranteed for us. And it's so absolutely beautiful. It almost brings me to tears, really. It just moves me on a level that I can't even express.
Thank you for testifying to that. Yeah, okay, so this is a plan of creation that we will return, that everyone will return, and that they'll do so in the time that they're willing to do it. Because they still have free will, even when it's imprisoned under all this confusion and error. Their inherent nature is still to exercise their own will. And so that means they get to decide when they're ready. Noel, you had I don't know if that was from before.
Yes, I think of it too as yielding my ego to the light, one could say, to spirit. For me, the idea of yielding and having my hands apart and up to receive is very meaningful.
Yeah, I like that word, yielding, relinquish. It's a choice to lay down your old defenses, your old belief systems, your old identity. It's a choice. And what the Course emphasizes is just lay it down. Don't continue to tell stories about it and get all wrapped up in the history of how you got to this point. Just lay it down. That's the most important part. Okay, so it's a matter of time, but the time matters. To your life, it matters when you make these choices. And so this is going to circle back on, how do you use your will? David?
Spiritual vision literally cannot see error and merely looks for atonement. All solutions the physical eye seeks dissolve. Spiritual vision looks within and recognizes immediately that the altar has been defiled and needs to be repaired and protected. Perfectly aware of the right defense, it passes over all others, looking past error to truth. Because of the strength of its vision, it brings the mind into its service. This reestablishes the power of the mind and makes it increasingly unable to tolerate delay, realizing that it only adds unnecessary pain. As a result, the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort.
Mhm. There is a lot here, and I encourage you to review again these material. There's only 6 paragraphs in today's section. It's not much, especially this paragraph. Spend some time on. So what's being said here, we're talking about spiritual vision. We said that's entirely different than intellectual understanding or physical sight. It looks within and recognizes the altar has been defiled and needs to be repaired and protected. So what we will find out later on, that your experience of the altar shows up in the form of what you're devoted to, of what you're dedicated to. You, said another way, you've already been to the altar of your inner self and already offered what is the most important thing to your life, the thing that you're dedicated to. But when that's done, when you don't really know who you are, or you're confused about your purpose and your function for being in this world, if you're confused about your relationship to your true self and to the Creator and all others, then your gift winds up being something that is framed within the world that you've learned within your past. It's framed by this world. So we would call it a separate gift. Or a distorted notion of self results in dedicating yourself, your life purpose becomes one that you make up on your own. So that would represent your past gifts to the altar. They are things that you decided were most important. Now you decided on your own and separately are most important. Now what we're being taught is that the atonement is the worthy gift for the altar, and any other gift there is your attempt to make God happy with your own plans. It's your attempt to assert yourself, of having your own good ideas of what would be appropriate to offer to God. So however well-intended that may be, it is always a plan that is framed within time and space, limitations, littleness, and lack and confusion. So, but spiritual vision will recognize, so this is very deep. Spiritual vision will look within and recognize that the choices you've dedicated yourself to previously are not the same as a holy vision. And it's aware of spiritual vision, let's say, because of the strength of its vision, it will bring the mind into its service. To me, when I read this and understood it, not when I read it, but when I understood it, this was the most powerful statement that I recall having. And here's another way to render it. Your spiritual vision, your real vision, will call your inner willpower, your free will, which is an attribute of your true self. Spiritual vision will call it, will pull it forward And now your will no longer is willing to tolerate pain and prison. And your will asserts itself. There must be a better way. I want out. And in doing so, Noel, you'll find this very interesting. It pulls your intellect, your mind, along with it, because you're going to need your mind in service of your will. So, and that reestablishes a will that was not free, that was imprisoned. It reestablishes the power of your will. Let's say this is very profound because it involves three things that we don't always talk about. One, it involves your spiritual vision. Two, it involves your formerly imprisoned will now asserting itself to become free. And three, it involves pulling the mind into the plan. So, because of this, and why does it do this? It says it right here, because of the strength of its vision. And as we read in workbook lesson 42, God is my strength. Vision is his gift. The strength of the vision should not be in question because of its source. Because of the strength of the gift, it pulls the will back into action, back into a purpose, rather than remaining imprisoned and settling to go through time while living in pain and confusion. It reawakens your willpower. And then to function, you're going to need your mind as an effective partner. So this reestablishes the power of the mind and makes the mind increasingly unable. So what is the evidence? When this happens, how will you notice it's happened? This way, because the mind will become increasingly unable to tolerate delay, and the mind will become more sensitive to lack of love, delay, guilt, judgment, not only your own, but even in the relationships around you. You will pick up on indications of lack of love that before you might have just tolerated as being normal. That's just the way things are. But now your mind becomes unwilling to go along with the lack of love that it might have previously tolerated. And so, and that motivates your will to want to bring healing into the world. Noel?
What if the purpose that you always thought you had, that admittedly came from some meditative sessions, isn't the one now? Is it ego?
So I think the simplest way to reflect on that, Noel, is just to say that purpose got you to this moment. And we don't have to say any more commentary about it. It's not, we don't have to make judgments whether it was good or bad or tell a story of why it got there. The fact is that that's what we had used up until now, period. And now comes along a holy gift called the atonement. And I'm more than happy to surrender the purpose I had in order to adopt what is now clearly the purpose reawakened in my mind. So, but what people will do is spend a lot of time looking in the rear view mirror about the purpose they had that got to there and telling the story and unraveling that. We would call that a further delaying maneuver. It got you to this moment, good for that. we're set aside and now adopt a new one. So that's my recommendation. And that's true, Noel, with every belief and every motivation we had in the past. They got us to this point. Time to let it go and move ahead. Kathy?
Yeah, and speaking about that, I was in therapy like 35 years, and about 3 years ago, I stopped. And I stopped telling my story, and I just study the course now, and that's enough. And I get spiritual guidance from you and Janet and Teresa, and I'm happier than ever. And I don't have to tell my story anymore, and it never really happened anyway. So.
Well, there you go. Living proof that it works. Susie?
I just have to laugh because there are no private thoughts. I was going to say the same thing. You know, I was in therapy for years, and I just for years told my story every single time I went. And yeah, this is a whole lot less expensive and works a whole lot better. And so I just wanted to ditto back on Kathy.
Thank you. Cheryl's turn.
Well, I want to ditto back on Kathy and Susie. I too, I mean, there's a place for therapy. I'm not going to belittle it,
That's right.
but there's also a time to move on. So I was in therapy, and still my very close friends, I still, you know, not there 100%, but I still sometimes, you know, talk about my narrative. And I love what Kathy said. I talked about my past, my story, and it wasn't even true. I love that, because it's narrative, it's interpretation, it's from the ego, it's confusing, it's before, you know, we find self in the spirit, you know? So yeah, but again, without that, I believe that everything in its time, we get what we can handle. We don't get any more or less than we can handle right now. So as much as I was introduced to the course, gosh, 25 years ago, I was not ready to receive it, you know, and, you know, you're ready. The messenger will appear when you're ready. And sometimes the messenger is standing right in front of you, and you're like, don't even know they're there. So, yeah. But anyway, what ditto. Thank you.
And one more comment, Noel.
For me, also, the story has been an excuse for delay, a rationalization, a defense, and what does he say? Procrastination and temporizing. So the more I can turn away from my story and like be in the present, then I don't even have that baggage.
Yes, indeed. And as you were saying that, Noel, I remember that by the time we get to chapter 25, if not before, we'll start to think of these stories and life purposes that we formulated as our idols. And because in many ways we worship them, we're devoted to them. They're our best that we could do on our own. And then our idols start to limit us. And so this would, then we reach the point where we're ready to surrender our idols for another way. Let's see, was there any other comments? I can't tell if hands that were up went down or whatever. Okay. All right, so what we're talking about is letting go of our own idols, however good it may have been. Doesn't always have to be self-destructive, narcissistic, whatever, it can be a pretty good idol, a pretty good story. But it's not the same as the one that's being offered us, offered all of humanity. Sooner or later, everyone will come to the atonement. This is a theme we can all join around. So I'm grateful that somebody suggested that the atonement, which is not a physical image, it's on the spiritual plane. Someone used the words to describe it as a virtual center of light within. And so it's okay to begin with an image that your eyes can see, but we don't want to remain stuck there and think that what we're talking about is a visual piece of art or an image. But we can allow the image to inspire our mind and lead us forward into our own inner journey. Thank you, David, for that idea of a virtual center of light within.
I can say something else about that too.
Sure.
And I was just thinking about this and trying to see what's the appropriate way for me to even express it. But that last paragraph had a lot in it. And I had an experience this morning in my meditation. And the notion of the spiritual vision looking within. It says here that the altar has been defiled and needs to be repaired and protected, but I did not have that experience at all. I had the experience, first of all, the experience of the atonement within the altar is the experience of nothingness and the experience of everythingness. And it was without thought, it was without vision, it was without awareness, but with total awareness. And it was really, really interesting because I recognized that at that moment, I am in atonement. I am at one with the universe and with all minds, and there is no discomfort. There is no sense of ego. There's no sense of David. There's only being. And that's that eternal kind of space. And you know, it's not something that stays very long. In fact, there's no awareness of time when I'm in it until I come out of it. And then I'm aware that, oh, there was some space that occurred that I had no normal awareness. The other thing I'd like to comment on in this paragraph before is it talks about, where is it? As a result, the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it once would have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. And I'm going to speak for Susie on this one, because over the last few years, she has changed in such a way, and her insight into things and her reaction to certain things has become much more broad in acceptance, but she's become increasingly sensitive to little things that would have previously been minor intrusions or of discomfort. And there are things that she recognizes in me that are my non-spiritual, non-evolved, egoistic, narcissistic, the things that we've talked about before. And the fact that they are no longer minor intrusions of discomfort, but cause increasing sensitivity, is part of the energy which creates the desire for change and the willingness to work the lessons harder, the willingness to incorporate the course more resolutely in one's thinking. And she is a real inspiration for me in that. And I'm trying to tag along like the little dog and get some of the same things. But it's just a testament to this course and to what any of us can do if we're willing to dedicate ourselves to practicing the lessons, working the meditation, the prayer, the asking the Holy Spirit. And I'm remiss in not doing it enough, but the results are irrefutable. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
So I just want to say something a little bit funny. Thank you for that, David. And I'm wondering if maybe during some of your waking hours, you might experience what you described in your meditation. I'm joking, of course.
Let the inner light out. Well,
Yeah.
yes, isn't that what we read first? It was that pictorial thing, is letting the inner radiance out. So that's higher up on the ladder for sure. We're so at one with our inner holiness that it extends, and our mind doesn't block it. It extends outward. Thank you for that sharing. Let's go on here.
The children of God are entitled to the perfect comfort that comes from perfect trust. Until they achieve this, they waste themselves and their true creative powers on useless attempts to make themselves more comfortable by inappropriate means. But the real means are already provided and do not involve any effort at all on their part. The atonement is the only gift that is worthy of being offered at the altar of God because of the value of the altar itself. It was created perfect and is entirely worthy of receiving perfection.
So I want to invoke the idea of idols again. And I mean that not to speak about any one of us, but all people wind up with a set of ideas that are meaningful and valuable to us. And we commit hours and hours of our life. Most of your idols, you've been at it for many years. You've worked it. By definition, you're dedicated to it. Okay. And they don't have to be bad things. You can be the best nurse that you can, provide the best service to your clients, you be the best school teacher you can. These are not necessarily immoral or wrong things. But they're self-appointed idols. And so what happens is the children of God wind up wasting themselves and their true creative powers on useless attempts to make themselves more comfortable with their idols. And that doesn't, and again, this is just the past. So we don't really have a lot more need to comment on it. But now we're learning that the only gift that is worthy of your devotion is the gift of atonement being offered at the altar. And so it's either your idols or the atonement. And don't think that from a decision point, this will necessarily be easy. Because after all, we've been dedicated to these idols, that can be more than one, for years, and we thought it was the best we could do with our life. And now we're realizing there's something better. We could do something that is a part of a broader plan, bigger than ourselves, that unites us with all living things, and that is, in fact, we're giving back to the Creator what we received as a gift. And so that's a more, Susie, this is not where we start out in the workbook lessons. This is later on when our will is free enough and where fear has subsided enough, we've overcome it, that we're willing to consider such an exchange of our idols for the altar. It's to do this requires, again, spiritual vision, free will, and as we said, with the will pulls the mind into the service of a greater good. Will?
Yes, good morning. What I'm getting from this is, oftentimes we talk about they're not trustworthy. They're not worthy of my trust. And what I sense it's really talking about is the trust comes from inside, whether you're dealing with somebody who may not look worthy of our trust. It's a matter of flipping that switch and trusting in general, and not saying I can trust this, but I can't trust that.
Yeah, I like the way you said that. It's a flipping of a switch, which is a decision that I'm going to move forward in trust, even though I can entertain other options. Yeah. Thank you. Noelle?
One way I conceptualize this is in terms of purpose again, and listening, a sacred contribution that may be different from the one you had before, or it may overlap, but the idea of sacred coming from guidance, a sacred contribution.
I like that, Noel, that symbol.
It's not mine originally.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It is a gift, but it's not just any gift. It's a sacred gift. And it's really about your life, about what you do with your life on behalf of the plan of atonement. So I split that paragraph into two. Here's the other half of the paragraph.
God and his creations are completely dependent on each other. He depends on them because he created them perfect. He gave them his peace so they could not be shaken and could not be deceived. Whenever you are afraid, you are deceived, and your mind cannot serve the Holy Spirit. This starves you by denying you your daily bread. God is lonely without his sons, and they are lonely without him. They must learn to look upon the world as a means of healing the separation. The atonement is the guarantee that they will ultimately succeed.
Whenever you are afraid, so I call chapter 2 one of the best cases for the need to heal from fear. Whenever you are afraid, you are deceived, and your mind cannot serve the Holy Spirit. Doesn't mean you can't hear, but you can't serve. You can't, your choices will be inhibited by your fears and uncertainties, your disbelief. And so not be able to serve the Holy Spirit. And that will cause your joy to dry up. It starves you by denying your daily bread. it cuts you off from your higher self and leaves you lonely without connection to spirit. So we must learn. It's a evolutionary journey of learning a new perceptual system to look upon the world as a means, this is an opportunity in this world to use it to heal the separation. And it's not just an idol, just the next, what is it, the remedy du jour or the latest fad. It's a plan that encompasses everyone throughout all time. Ultimately, everyone will return into the atonement. And so there's it comes with a guarantee that it will ultimately succeed. I want to do my rendition of the summary of some of the major points that we had today. I forgot to do this one paragraph at a time. So we're talking about the altar. You can approach the altar, to use another symbol, as the kingdom of heaven within you. It's the center within you where the presence of God is experienced. It's where we commune with spirit. It's not a prayer. It's not an asking with all those words and everything. It's a way of being with the spirit. And for those of you who've been at it for a while, the altar is where you hear the voice of the Holy Spirit speak. Where do you hear the voice of the Holy Spirit speak? It's not inside your ego. It's from the altar. So we call it an altar to truth. It's an altar to God. It conveys an idea of perfection, and it's worthy to receive a perfect gift. And so philosophically, you could ask yourself, is your altar open to receiving your gift? Or is there idols placed around your altar that have a higher priority for you? For these are metaphors. The altars really represent what you're devoted to, your dedication. And devotion can be thought of as a belief beyond question. You don't even question it. We were created for devotion. But self-deceptions come along and interfere and divide us into two perceptual systems. This is the separation, two voices, and two voices will usurp the altar to the Father, and the altar becomes a place where we dedicate ourselves to idols of our own making. This is the problem. So, therefore, right perception or corrected perception, healed perception is needed before God can communicate once again directly at your altar. So right perception becomes the focus of this course. Spiritual sight comes with that. And perfect vision allows you to see the altar with perfect clarity and recognize that all has not been well in the past. The altars we dedicated ourselves to our own idols and are therefore in need of repair. And when the spiritual vision shows you this, it's like an existential crisis. And your spiritual vision will call your mind to get with the program and to clean up the perceptual problems of the mind so that it can become once again stable and at equilibrium and capable of joining you at the altar. Just a little aside, David was describing his experience of that. He's been meditating since 1968, I think. So he's learned to have a calm mind that doesn't get distracted so much. And it takes calm mind to enter into this spiritual state, because the ego certainly wants to fill you with ideas that would pull you away. So spiritual vision must teach and bring the mind into its service here. That is the fundamental purpose of the course, is to train your mind to be a worthy companion of spirit and sit in communion with your highest self. And while you're there, what will you do? You'll give back the gift that was given to you. Atonement is the gift that you give. And when you do that, it's atonement for everything and everyone without an exclusion. You are basically atoning for all creation, recognizing them, that wholeness is a part of you. And this will have to be a topic for another day, but when you do that, you become invulnerable to ego fears and the notions of uncertainty and doubt that plague the untrained mind. So there's a lot to be said about all this. You could say that today was an introduction to the altar, to God. We're not done with it. Something as important as this, we will revisit again and again. But these are some of the structural components that you need. The recognition that you can put idols at your altar, or you can put the atonement at your altar. The recognition that you need spiritual vision to see the altar clearly. And that when you do see the altar clearly, you're not going to want those idols there anymore. They're going to seem shabby compared to the gift of forgiving all things in time and space. And that then you will know that we've got to stabilize the mind. It cannot continue to serve two masters, false perception and true perception. It needs to become stabilized in order to be calm enough to sit at the altar, offering the gift of atonement, and not want to run away the way the ego would have you want to find other things to do with yourself. So these are foundational topics. We will certainly be referring to them again and again, and we'll be doing so not so much for the rest of the weekend. Just wanted to go back and remind you that on Sunday and Monday's class, we will be introducing level confusion, not introducing it, we've talked about it before, but we'll be going deeper into level confusion. Remember, all sickness, all disequilibrium of the mind comes from confusing the levels. And when we say levels, a simple way to think about that is body, mind, and spirit, confusing those levels so that when you enter into that state of communion at the altar, you're not getting confused with body impulses or intellectual impulses, but you're able to remain calm and sustain focus with spiritual vision long enough to really be present to the gifts that are there. So we'll cover those things on Sunday and Monday. I hope that you can join us. If you're not able to join us, you know, the videos are on YouTube, or certainly you can read the material on your own as well. Noel, can you hang around for a few minutes after class? So I want to thank you all. David, thank you for reading. Thank you all for being a part of this incredible journey here. It is an evolutionary process of stepping forward, and I'm delighted to be with you in this journey. Namaste.
Thank you all. Love you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, you
Love
too.
you all,
Great
too.
day.
Thanks, David.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye.
Good to see you, Will.